Good afternoon. It's a tough thing to always follow Harish. I mean, always we have a debate. Who goes and takes the session after lunch? I think so organizers have been really kind enough. Till date he has been pushing it to me, but it was his time to eat away. Let's get into this session. My session is about advanced T-SQL querying and programming inside SQL Server. My name is Vinod Kumar. I'm a technology evangelist specializing on SQL Server, fundamentally on databases and BI. So that has been my core areas of expertise. You do have a URL which does lead you to my website, and my blogs are also around. I'm pretty much social enough, and I'm also putting you my Twitter handle. Feel free and do add me, pass me your comments. I'll be more than happy to get them on the session and even post session about SQL Server anytime. Now the topic is interesting, and at the same time it gives me a lot of liberty to do whatever I like to do. The reason is, when I say advanced T-SQL, what is advanced to me may be very well basic to you, right? And what I think is basic might sometimes feel advanced to you. So as it's a double-edged sword when this particular session comes up, and obviously what I try to do here most probably is go through some of these aspects. I'll talk about some of these aspects. I'll talk about, because SQL Server is a big ocean as far as I'm concerned. Every year, every day almost, I keep on learning something new, and I keep exploring a lot of things. And as part of this exploration, I start feeling that, okay, there's no end to this quest of thirst that I'm getting for learning this technology. As interesting as it might become, it is just more of my learnings that I'm trying to share with you. So some of these tips, some of these tricks might be insights, some of them might be behaviors. So it's important for us to understand why this behavior, or should I really need to know such behaviors, so that these become like a pitfalls when it gets into your production environment. So more often than not, those are the things. These are just representative of what could be done. More often than not, you can just rename this whole topic as tips and tricks with SQL Server. It's as simple as that. Now, I could have started with a whole bunch of best practices, but I said that, okay, right, let me not start with best practices, let me talk about common worst practices. Because it is often at times we release new versions after the version, and more often than not, people take these nice, cool looking features and start using the technology for the heck of using the technology. And sometimes that's your pitfall number one. Your pitfall number one is that don't use the technology because it exists. A classic example would be using XML inside relational databases. Now if I just ask anybody that, okay, when do you use XML inside a database, I know there's a lot of butterflies flying around. You have absolutely no clue. Because that's what happens. Sometimes technology itself is so vast and deep, we forget where to use it, why to use it, and fundamentally the last part is how to go about using it. Or if we even use it, are we using it the best way? Okay, so we need to be very much cognizant of the fact that technology is there to ease our life, but it is not to the point where it has to get abused. Okay, so you'll have to be very, 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 very careful about it. You'll have to use it intelligently. That's what we are here for. There are a whole bunch of other things. The second point is fundamentally about the default options. And this is one other thing which I've felt a lot of times people come back and say, it's like a good enough database. That's a point one. Second, I installed it. It doesn't work. Now I say, great. What did you do? I didn't do anything. I just installed it. I took the default values. And then I asked, okay, how big is our database? They say, oh, it's 500 gigs. I said, boss, now you're talking a different league. You're in a different league. You've got to go ahead and tune your database. There are things which are optimized for few tens of GBs versus few hundreds of GBs. When you move into these two paradigms, the cards that you play are totally different. So don't assume defaults, and sometimes defaults are tricky also. Now, who's there? I mean, obviously, it is our duty to go ahead and show you some of these things. Think of the technology more often from a SQL perspective as an end-to-end technology. We have a restore strategy. That's reduced to 1/10 of what it was. Actually, you shouldn't be doing a backup strategy. You should never be doing a backup strategy. What is backups for? What is backups for? Yes, that's the key word, disaster. When disaster happens, that's when you start falling back into a backup. But does disaster happen every now and then? So the idea is mostly about your recovery phase, which is much more important. Disaster happen once in a while, it might happen or it may not happen at all in your tenure in a particular organization. So more often than not, what you're actually getting into a point is that, how do I recover? How fast can I recover? The idea or an intent of a DBA's job is at stake only at that one moment of time. He's preparing his resume like anything. That disaster will show that. So the idea is how fast you can recover. If your business is such a big business, how do you recover? How much of SLA do I have? If I have to recover within a day, what all strategies can I make? If I have only 2 hours to recover, how do I do a strategy for it? You can't have a full backup on the year starting and say that I'll do transaction log backup every 30 minutes. No, you're in the month of April. If you do that, you'll have 5,000 log backups. Your restore will take at least 4 days. Not acceptable. So your strategy for any point in time is not on the backup system, but it's on the restore system. Think about it, how fast I should recover. If that is the case of my recovery and my SLA, what should be my backup strategy for this? So think about it. These are all things to ponder, and I just thought it's worth talking briefly. My session is very lightweight, as Harish does. Obviously, I'm not using Notepad. I've been kind enough in using the PPTs. We'll just talk briefly about SQL 2008, T-SQL, and then we'll move into a bunch of demos. Okay, so it's all about demos. It's about interactivity. These are scenarios that I've come across. I've seen people using it. But how innovatively we went about using the technology is the whole crux of this session. Is that fine? I know afternoon sessions are the toughest, both as a speaker and as an audience. Sleeping is allowed, snoring is not. Please respect the next guy near you. Okay, so what do we have in SQL? I mean, obviously inside SQL Server 2008, I can just go on about la. This is it. This is a new data type. We have this, we have a hierarchy ID, we have merge, we have date time, we have this and that. A lot of these are intrinsically an engine change, and that's the nice part of it. When you talk about engine change, has SQL Server evolved, and how do you go and measure that evolution? You have to go and see that there are changes that are happening at the core. And here are some of the features which fundamentally go about saying that the core is changing. The core of the SQL engine is changing. The way in which we execute is changing. And the best part is that, the worst part is that we will start not understanding, oh, this change has brought a different behavior into SQL Server, and that's what we'll miss out. So we introduced 4 levels of date. We introduced with SQL Server 2008. We had date time, which was a standard date time that we gave. Then we introduced date, we introduced time, we introduced date time 2, and we introduced UTC offset also. Now, what is the difference between, how many have used date time? All of you? Most of you. What is the precision of a date time? Yeah, 3 milliseconds. In SQL Server 2008, date time 2, what is the precision? How many are on SQL Server 2008? Red? You don't want to raise your hands? Might be 1 or 2. 1 of what? 1 millisecond. You are offset exactly by 10 power 4. 1 nanosecond. 100th of a nanosecond. Okay, sorry. 100th of a nanosecond is the precision level of SQL Server datetime 2 data type inside SQL Server. So sometimes these small things do add up to a lot of things. Example, what will be the precision level that you will get from your .NET code? Harish was showing a whole bunch of .NET code out here. What is the precision level over there? Think. I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to throw a lot of these questions, things to go and explore. Okay, so they are interesting, and that's something that you'll have to look at. Language changes. A whole bunch of language changes that keep happening. It is betterment at the same time adhering to standards. A lot of these are standards behaviors. Merge is a classic standard behavior of something which the industry calls as upsert. I don't know how many of you know about it. Upsert is then combination of insert and update. Incidentally, SQL Server went ahead and also implemented the concept of insert, update, and delete in the same statement. You would hear this mantra or in a developer handbook saying that use set-based operations over procedural inside a database. How many of you have heard this? Set-based, using set-based languages. I see only one hand out there. SQL, or any database for that matter of fact, is brilliant in using a set-based operation. They are meant for that. Cursors are not native to SQL or not native to databases. Cursors were more of a procedural code that we wanted to add on top of it. I'll not talk about the procedural languages much into it. A whole bunch of additions that we did. Filtered index, adding a filter to an index. There are unique things that really come out of using a filtered index. I'll show you an example where a classic scenario can be really brought out. Now, so when you were talking about it, you said a whole bunch of demos that you're going to show, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just, the next, whatever, half an hour, 40 minutes, we will, as much as possible, try to go through different tips, tricks, or understanding of behaviors inside SQL Server. Is that fair enough? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of it. I'm not going to talk about any of them. The only tool, colorful tool, which I can use ever in my life is the SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so this is the only colorful tool that I have for you today. Okay, so our life starts and ends over here. Okay, so that's where it is. So let's, I know it's an afternoon session, so let me start with few trivias. Let me ask you a few questions here. See the code out there. It says declare at string varchar, assign it a value, and I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, what does the data length give you? What does the data length give you? Number of characters, right? And the string I'm printing. So what is my output here now? What is my output? What will be my output? Five zero. I actually have only 40 characters there. The number of zeros that you see is only 4. You only see 4 zeros there. That means it's 40. So will I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till 40, and then I'll get the 40 characters. Is that right? Yes or no? Who said no? What will you get? Yeah? Maybe 1 or it is 1. There's a difference. For the benefit of doubt, yeah? So now, yeah, everybody's slightly getting up. You get only 1. By default, I haven't given any length over there, so automatically SQL has gone ahead and said that I'll give you a 1 character length. It's as good as saying char of 1. By the way, the trivia is not here. The trivia is coming next. Now we understand the default length is how much? 1. So why I put this is to understand certain default behaviors. Okay, so that's the reason why I had put that. Now come to this next set. Now I'm saying my character length is 40. My character length is 40. I am casting it to a varchar. Now what is my output? 1 or is it 40? Forty and the value, 1 and 1, 1 and 1, how many? Okay, few 1 and 1. Somebody came with an innovative number, 30. I mean, by the way, who was that? I mean, like, anyways, yeah? Why 30? Oh, you missed out the other 0, okay. Okay, sorry on that. Maybe I have to zoom it. So, what are we going to take? 40 and 1. Fair? Yes or no? All of you are with me till now? Yes? Now the interesting part comes. The interesting part comes. He didn't read it wrongly, he read it correctly. Actually, it's only 30. By the way, there are 40 characters here. Now, why this 30 again? There are 4 zeros here. Actually, you see 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are 4 zeros there. There are 40 characters. But how 30 now? Cast takes 30 by default for varchar. Default behaviors can differ between functions to functions. Okay? So 30 was the right answer. I thought he would give the right answer. I think so. I'm sorry to say, I think so the 10-minute break of SLR was very important for you, I think so. you should be in that this thing. Now, over here, I think so Vinod is tricking me a lot now with these strings here. I'm like, what do I do over here now? On this, I said it's a varchar. Yeah, 1. I was just trying to check if you are awake or not. Okay, so the easier part is done. So now I have shaken you a bit. Now you understand what the importances are. So for each thing that I'm going to tell, there is going to be something behind it. You have seen this think about this. This can be a very easy miss by any developer out there. You might miss it out. You might not given casting and you might forget it. You can have data truncation. Data loss is one of the biggest problems. Okay? If the data goes within the 30 characters, you're fine. But if data loss happens, that is one of the biggest crimes that can ever happen. You will get into a lawsuit. Okay, so better be careful about all your default values that you're using. Yeah, so let's get back. The second part is about, this is again a shaker. So about identities. How many of you use identities? If you are not using, there's something wrong. You should be using it in some fashion or the other. Okay, so identity, more often than not, you will be using it. Now, as I start using identity, how do I go and retrieve the value of an identity? How do I retrieve a value of an identity? Attached identity does give me all the values. Nobody is debating right here. Let's be clear about this. You're fine? Yes? Okay, wonderful. So the problem itself, the problem statement over here comes from my previous statement saying that attached identity is not a problem, that is the problem now. Okay? So what's the problem over here? Let's understand this. So for illustration purposes, let me just create a couple of tables here. So I'm just creating a table. It's got an identity. It says 1, 1, so you start incrementing from 1, keep on jumping by 1, 1 value. Okay? I've added some values. I've got the value. Okay, so I have 3 different rows. Fair enough. I'm adding one more table. Now this has got an identity which starts from 100, keeps on jumping by 5, and it stores. So far, so good. Everybody is with me now. Now, here's the twist to the whole story. I'm going to go and add a trigger. I'm going to add a trigger on my first table to say that as soon as an insert happens on my first table, insert into this second table. Okay, some value. That's what I have done. Okay, the idea of, so the first table, how much was the increment count? Second table? Very good. Now, what will this do? Insert value into my first table. What does this do? Get the, what is the value? What is the last inserted value? 4. So the last inserted value was from the trigger, and that's the reason you're getting 115. On this case, the attached identity is not supposed to, will not give you this current table's identity, but the last inserted value. So which means, okay, so now you might come back again and say that, okay, it makes sense sometimes, but in a multi-user scenario, this can really go for a toss. Okay, so if you want to get your actual value from the last insert statement that you did, always use scope identity. Okay, that's a SQL Server tip. The last yeah. Whenever you want to get the last inserted, whatever inserted value, not as a byproduct of this insert, if you want the identity of that, you'll have to be using this scope identity. In my current scope, get me my identity value. Okay, this is a very old tip. This is not it's not a new tip that I'm trying to give you here. Okay. This is the best for you around. Okay. Now let's come back to this. This is the third. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of these trivias that come by, and now this is an important one, which is fundamentally around nulls. And nulls intrinsically have a problem because nobody can quantify what a null is. Now, is null an unknown, or is null quantifiable, or null means nothing? That's the fourth category he's giving me now. So nulls as such are a headache for a lot of reasons. Okay, you start looking at normalization techniques. Everybody tells that, oh, put all the nulls in a different table. You don't need that table because it's all null anyway. So existence or non-existence of a value always puts a lot of stress. Now this is fine till the point when it is part of your logic. Now the logic gets complicated because of the requirement. Now the requirement is very simple, and where nulls become a big headache is this. When you have a nice search page, suddenly you have like 20 columns over there and you hit the search button. Now you have absolutely no clue, has he entered one column or has he entered all the 19 columns? And then you bring all this data to the backend, and then now you start doing what? What do? You start doing all sorts of manipulation, is null or was null or will be null. We have no clue. Where do we start? Where do we end? And the query, somebody said that, oh, you shouldn't use dynamic SQL. How many of you know this? Everybody knows this and says there's no other choice. I'll go ahead and start concatenating. And then there's a whole bunch of if, then, if, then, if, then, if, then. If the first parameter is null, concatenate. Second parameter is not null, concatenate. Keep on going with the whole this thing, and then at last you go and say execute. Wonderful area where you can get SQL injection. Welcome to the world. And people say that how do I run away from SQL injection? Don't write such code. And you'll say that don't ask me such requirements to the customer. I don't want them. Like it's a double-edged sword now you're getting into. Now it's an interesting thing. Now if you go step by step, then you'll be able to solve this. Now assume that it's a single parameter. It's a single parameter value we'll start with, and then we'll start to complicate this whole thing. Okay? So in a very simple parameter, there's a whole bunch of things. As and when the time permits, we'll keep on going to how many other tips that I have. Okay? So there's no limit over here. So in this particular case, I'm just selecting it from an orders table. It's just one single row, one value. That's it. It's a very simple thing. At this moment of time, there is no nulls. I'm assuming that at any point in time from the screen, he will send me the orders ID and I'm going to catch it. It was a very easy thing. But why I came over here is to show you this. It's on the execution plan. And the execution plan is very interesting. If somebody can remember this, 00328 or 0.0033. 0.0033 is the cost. A cost of a query is nothing but how much of resources am I going to expense at this moment of time. Resources could be CPU, memory, and the IO that I might be using. That's it. Okay, it's a logical read or a physical read, or it could be a CPU cycle that I might be using. Now, the twist to the whole story is saying that, okay, right, first I get this null. So there is a possibility now, which is in my stored procedure, that this parameter might be null or might not be null. Now what do I do? Write a case, good. Then, much more easier way, is null. Don't go into, tell me on set-based operation. Is null was a good one, and there is one more, coalesce. Okay, so more often than not, people use one of these two methods. Okay, at any point in time, understand this, it's an cluster index seek. At any point in time, the moment you start adding functions to a predicate, we will not be using the indexes, that's the point one. Second one, as soon as you start adding functions to any predicate, you increase the cost. At this point in time, actually there is no null value. I'm sending you a value, but I'm just adding a coalesce on top of it. And remember the earlier cost, 0033. Now, what's the cost? Now, it's a factor of what? Huge factor now. adding a function increases the cost sky high difference. Okay? Now, it's a CPU cycle, it can be anything that you like, but it increases your cost unnecessarily, and it negates the fact that there is an index that exists. Okay? So, index short circuiting happens, and at the same time, because what is an index? What is an index? Index is not a lookup. What's an index? You're coming pointer, logical arrangement. It's a B tree. B tree is the method in which we go about storing it. It is nothing but an ordered set on a particular key. That's it. It's an ordered set based on the key, whichever key it is. For a cluster index, it's the cluster index key. Non-cluster index is the non-cluster index key. Okay. So whenever you start having a non-clustered seek and then you move to a clustered seek, because you're negating the existence of the index, your cost automatically goes and shoots up. Okay. So that's what has really happened over here. Now, we said Qualys was there, it didn't work. Is null. Is null is one of the other this thing, and I've seen codes wherein like you have like 2-page, 3-page sort of in select query with all this is null going, and you put them in parentheses. What is my cost? It's not bad, it is as bad as what Qualys could give you. Just including one function, you increase your cost like anything. So now, Vinod, good point, I got this. What's the workaround now? What is the workaround? So that's where you get into. Now, the whole idea becomes even more difficult when you start looking at, okay, what is my workarounds here? Workarounds, 9 out of 10 times people say that yes, only execute for which the function is, which is fundamentally your dynamic SQL. Now, you said the dynamic SQL you should not use. How many of you write this? Go about building dynamic SQL, especially for your search pages. If you're not raising your hand, you don't want to. That's what I know it. But 9 out of 10 times, you are using a dynamic SQL. You keep on putting that if-else parameters, and then at last you say execute at str, whatever it is, or my stmnt, whatever it is, my statement, and it executes. Now, the problem is not about dynamic SQL, but in the methodology at which the dynamic SQL is being done. Okay. Dynamic SQL has to go through the whole compilation parsing. You don't go and store the compilation and the execution plans, and that is the mistake that we do. There is another way of building the dynamic SQL, which we call it as preparing a dynamic SQL. Okay, putting the if then else is not the preparation part. Preparation part is after that. Okay, preparing a dynamic SQL. So whenever you parameterize your queries, it starts to get compiled and executed, and the plans and caches are being kept aside. That means I have to prepare and keep it. I have to tell SQL Server that this is as good as like a parameterized query. How do I tell SQL Server? Very simple. Here is the preparation method. The normal preparation methods are anyway on. Okay, so we are starting here. It's as good as the normal one. So 1 is equal to 1, then you start doing all your is null. Now, the only difference that you see between the code that you would have written and what I have written here is that I have not put the single quotes here and concatenated the parameter. I have not concatenated the parameter here. Even in the select statement that is going to be get generated, it's going to have that at value. That means that I have to pass this as a parameter somehow. Okay, you're able to see that code. Now, at this moment of time, use sp execute SQL. sp execute SQL allows you a way in which you could pass parameters to a dynamic SQL. Auto parameterization helps you a lot. Now, you might ask, okay, what's the big deal? I mean, like you said, 2 parameters, is it going to really skew my whole thing? So just for illustration purposes, I'm using callers and isnull. Both are as bad as in the execution plan. So I'm going to run this sp execute SQL and the callers isnull together side by side. And the execution plan here would tell you what the differences are. The first one took 1%, whereas the second one took 99%. Interesting? Are you able to digest it? Okay, so using dynamic SQL is not the problem, but parameterizing and preparing the dynamic SQL is the problem. If we get that right, you will get a really good execution plan. Okay? Now, we are just getting started. Okay? There's a lot more. Be ready now. Now, there is this unique requirement of a unique index which says that I can have unique values but can allow nulls. Uniqueness inside SQL Server applies also to null. You can't have multiple nulls because it assumes that this unique, this unknown value can get translated to any of the existing values. So it does not allow you to have multiple nulls. Though two nulls mean nothing in the system, people go about thinking, how do I go about enabling this? Any of the existing methodology that you would have used, and a lot of them have tried this, either as a constraint, or they go about doing this as part of a trigger. Please do not use triggers because the amount of heftiness that the heavy lifting that has to take, humongous. Don't be using triggers for such a constraint operation because for checking the uniqueness, you will have to scan through the complete row and then you will be putting a complete lock on top of it. You're increasing your overhead over there, okay? And it cannot happen for every transaction in an OLTP system. You cannot expect that to happen. So now, what's my workaround here? With SQL Server 2008, and one of the features that I introduced was this concept of I created the table. I create a non-clustered index. At this point in time, I set filtered indexes are a way in which I can go ahead and allow you to do it. Okay? So this predicate, end of the day, says that, okay, right, you can have nullable values on one side. Okay? You can have nullable values which is written there. And then I say, create an unique index over here for column is not null. That means enforce the uniqueness only on the not null values, which means now I can have multiple nulls over here, which comes to the point, if I insert a row which is, I don't know whether I executed that, let me just execute it. So if I execute a row which is like 1, 1, okay, by the way, how many of you have seen this syntax? Now you can send multiple pad values, okay, row constructor with insert statement. It's allowed with SQL Server 2008 onwards. Okay, you insert a row constructor, it says that uniqueness or a duplicate value has been found because that constraint has happened. So IDX column 1 not null has got violated. But the same thing I created with a null, at this point in time, it just goes through. Okay, so you can create constraints. Constraints are nothing but indexes, but at this point in time, I'm taking one specific requirement, especially for the uniqueness, which a lot of them have asked as a requirement. Obviously, at some point in time, we are expecting the product team to take this. We have a lot of feedbacks have gone behind, but this is a workaround that a lot of them have asked for.
What is the scope identity does it give you? Scope identity?
I didn't get you. Okay. What will be your?
Scope identity.
For what?
If you insert multiple rows in
the last inserted value you will get. Last inserted. It's an interesting, actually, row constructor is not as easy as you see here. Okay, the question should have been even more thought-provoking over here to just twist it. When I have such values, the problem is, one is with your scope identity, that's fine. The second is, if you have a trigger, now your trigger should be ready to accept a batch, because now your trigger inserted in your deleted rows, or your inserted rows in this particular case will have 2 rows now. And if you have not accounted for your inserted row for inserted table, if you have not accounted in your trigger for multiple batches, then you will get into a problem. You will insert only the last row's value you will be taking it. So you'll have to look at batching operations. Okay, so the concept of moving away from a single DML operation to a batching DML operation is what happens here. Okay, so let's move into this third category, which is something that I encountered with one of our hosters. Okay. The hosters had this unique way. They said they went about doing this. They went about storing IP addresses inside the databases. They were doing some sort of an activity. They were storing IP addresses. They were doing some mapping and all that. Okay, it's a very interesting activity that they were doing. And one of the requirements for them was that, okay, how do I sort by the IP addresses? And they were going about just storing this as like a normal string operation, because they didn't have a method of actually storing it. So in this particular case, where I'm just showing you, is that they stored it as a normal text column. And the problem of a normal text column is that here at this moment of time, if I try to sort this whole thing, this is not actually sorted. For me, this 3 dot something has to be on top, whereas the others have to come. It's almost like the reverse order, the normal sorting. This is not the way in which I would have loved the sorting to happen, because this is normal text sorting. A text sorting, number 1 comes on top. Doesn't matter about how it is, right? Then you start thinking about it, okay, right, how do I go about breaking this whole thing? How would you sort it? The simple answers would be like you go about breaking each of this octet, and then you go about doing some sort of an juggling activity, and you do some circus to get it. Which incidentally, one of the developers somehow figured out doing. That is fundamentally to go and break up, and wherever you had lesser number of digits, you go about padding it with values, and then making it as a consistent value, and then you sort it. And the logic seems like this, which I don't think so, it's completely out of scope of this particular session. But the idea, you get it. He went about breaking it, he created a function, and then used that function to actually join and then sort it based on 3 different octets. Wonderful idea, it worked. Okay, now, you told this, it is a working solution. Now, what's the deal over here? Now, the deal is very simple. Do you think it's one of the most efficient solutions that you can ever get? You feel it's not, and if you try to think about what's the solution, it's even more difficult actually. So here is a place where I'm trying to give you a solution which is slightly different. Okay, it is not the normal solution, but it's a completely offset from the actual topic. How many of you heard about hierarchy IDs? I put it up on the slide. I said hierarchy IDs is somewhere there. Okay, this is like good. I mean, like Vinod, I think so. You told me about that particular piece. Now, hierarchy IDs have a unique way of representation, and if we understand that hierarchy IDs, then it will be an interesting part now. Okay, so hierarchy IDs always start from a root node, and a root node is always denoted by a slash. Okay, any hierarchy is like a B tree. Okay, so it's no different. Manager, employee manager sort of a relationship. You will have a hierarchy that it goes. Okay, any hierarchies you take Active Directory, anything that you take, it's in hierarchical nature. And anything that goes to the left, I'll say that you're number 1. It's an easy one. And then you go to the right, you're number 2. Okay, so far so good. Now, how do I represent this? I represent it saying that you're /1/ and you're /2/. Now, if somebody comes in between, now somebody is coming in between these 2 values, and you try to insert it. Think about it again in the B tree fashions. Okay, what will happen? Here, as soon as somebody comes and tries to put a node here, it becomes 1.1. Now, slightly getting better. Okay, now we are slightly getting better, and anybody who goes to the other side, he becomes 0. If somebody comes in between, it becomes 1.0 to the right and to the left. You keep on doing this, and if somebody tries to come and join similarly in between, and if there's a hierarchy that goes down, it's very simple. 1.1.1, other side if it falls 1.1.2. That's the way it will be, like this. Okay. Now at some point in time, now I see some analogy over here. This looks like at some point in time I can also get the same thing like a IP address. It's all like pointing scale, and hierarchies are stored in a particular order. top down. It's very easy for me. So if I tell SQL Server engine itself has got this hierarchy ID, if I tell SQL Server that IP addresses are like an hierarchy ID, now sorted like an hierarchy ID, and if I tell SQL Server to do it, SQL Server will do it for me. And here is how it happens. I said about the slash, remember? I said the slash and slash are the delimiters. I said just went about saying that just add the 2 slashes, order it by the hierarchy ID. There you go. One easy select statement, you're just done. Okay? Hierarchy IDs were not meant for this. They're totally not meant for this. But it's just that we tricked it to actually do it the way that we want it to do. Okay? So it is to understand how the concept, understand the inner logical model of the concept, take the same logical model, look at your current problem, try to remap it, reuse it. Which one? 2008 onwards. Yeah, I didn't change the data type, I just changed the ordering mechanism here. I didn't change any of the data types, I just said order like the hierarchy ID, that's it. Okay, so I didn't change the data type. Okay, so yeah, it's far more better than what you did before. It will be far more better than, I mean, see, everything has got a cost. These are all different types of tricks that you're looking at. Okay, so which one is better? 1 second, I'm just showing you the last one which I did with breaking. The more the number of functions that you start using, the more is the cost associated to it. And my splitting algorithm had a lot of functions to it. Replace and do it, cast it, char index it, and all that. And then you just compare it with these 2 strings. One is 67%, and what we did with hierarchy ID is the 33%. You can see that, see the clear difference. Okay, so don't get into the fine prints of the performance. There's a lot more to it. Okay, so there's a lot more that we can do. I mean, it doesn't matter in what form it is. Sometimes you go about storing comma separated strings, and even those have a similar problem. So if you have something like a comma separated string over here, and then you want to do a similar thing that you wanted to do, like you use it as a hierarchy, you want it in the same ordering, the same concept holds good here. All you have to do is you have to go ahead and replace all the commas with a slash. It becomes like a hierarchy ID tree, sorted based on that. That's it. So all your minuses are on top, and your rest of the values have come down automatically. Okay. Now, interesting? Yes? Okay. Now let's get into some more real life things. Okay. One of the things that come by more often than not is this whole concept of date, time, usage of date and times. Okay. And as soon as you have date and times, I'm 9 out of 10 times I've seen this code on production environments, on financial applications. I have no clue what is the date time. They say that, okay, we are all geo dispersed. So the date can come from UK, it can come from US, it's from India, I don't know where it is, it's from Australia. And then they say that, okay, right, the code, as soon as you come into the code, they say, okay, right, something where cast of the input string equal to cast of the column. How many of you have done this, or at least seen this? So my first tip would always mean that it is your application. When it is your application, decide on one format, always insert, update, delete in that format. Just keep it universal. Because what you are trying to manipulate is trying to manipulate the UI of how it looks. The same character or the data is actually represented in different ways. YYMMDD or DDMMYY, you have no clue about it. That's an UI thread. Go about doing it in your front end. Take this data, look at the culture, show it in that format. That does not mean that I will always store it in that format only. It never meant anywhere. When it is your application, decide on what is the format that you will use. That's the easier job. Now, you get into the second this thing, which is of reality. A lot of them have to go and have to compare a date. I don't know what the time portion. At the point of insert, you will say get date. And at the point of retrieval, you say that, okay, I don't want the time component. I want only the date component. Now, what do I do about it? I mean, more often than not, people go about using different mechanisms, and I know a lot of you have used this. You most probably change it into a character of 8, and then what? Whatever date, okay? And this is the universal. 101 is not universal, please. If you want to use an universal format, use this format. More often than not, it will work, okay? Now, this is fine to some extent, okay? So if you go about running it, you get one universal format, and then you say that I don't want the time component to it. It's a very easy thing. Either you write as date time. Now what happens? Sorry. Now what happens? I remove the time factor to it. It's a very easy way of doing and cast character and then the convert to it. Now you have moved from a date, moved to a character, and from character you again come back to a date time. There's too much of layers that you have gone through this. Okay, there are slightly interesting ways of doing it. Okay, how many of you know about from an offset? What is the day 0 inside SQL? 1900? 00? 1900. So the idea is very simple. Here is one other mechanism in which you can do it. Okay, so this is a particular point in time. This is the day 0. Okay, the day 0 is there, and then you have a time scale that goes on, and each of these are a date. And your idea is to say that I want to know all the orders which are passed on this date. You're asking me, I want it on this date. So how can I get this date? There are two ways of doing it. The first one is go ahead and calculate, okay, how many days are there from day 0, and just add that many days from day 0. That removes your time component. Okay, it's a very easy way of tricking SQL. Okay, go back in time, tell me how many days you want are there from day 0, and then come and just add that many from day 0. That means day 0 does not have a time component, so when you add it, automatically time component is gone. Okay, interesting so far. Now I don't know what the code is, right? You're asking me that. Okay, so let's idea is to first find out how many days are there. So I want you to calculate the number of days from day 0. Forget it. It will give me a number. The idea is that go ahead and add that many days. Go add that many days. Time component is gone. Now, this is one typical example of a date time usage, but how can I go on twisting this? What are the different ways in which? What is the first day of the month? Just go ahead, change this. First day of the month. It's a very simple way in actually going about saying that, let me get a reference point, I'll add that many from the reference point, and it will always come right. What is the last day of the month? Anyone? Go one day back, come back, it tells you what is the last day of this month. There you go. So one simple code. Now the same thing can be for the year. You try it for anything else that you want, but this is the most fastest way in which you could actually go. Always have a baseline, come back to baseline, and then take it forward. It becomes very easy for you to actually calculate. This is a very neat trick with actually with date. There's nothing to do with SQL 2008 or this thing. It's the standard way. Okay, it's there with all the other values that you could do it. Now, okay, so let's talk about custom sequence. Okay, so I have a little bit more time. I can talk about a couple more tips out here. I may not be exhaustive, but we'll talk about them. Custom sequence. Custom sequence comes at places wherein it becomes more often standard. Okay, you get into standard, you have a whole bunch of people coming with compliance and audits. you're selling a ledger, and ledgers cannot suddenly have a missing number there, right? So how do you create invoice numbers? How do you create all of them? More often than a lot of them have said that, okay, I want to use this identity thing, but I can't use it because I can have numbers getting skipped, and I can't use identity value. Now, how do you go about working around this? You create your own identity, you create a single table, I mean single row, single column, and every time you go about, you go and update that particular single row. Whole bunch of hassles, okay? Now here is a method. Actually, there are two methods that I'm going to just show you. One of the methods is fundamentally about composable DMLs. I'll talk about composable DMLs in the example that I'm showing you, okay? Because it's a slightly more elaborate topic, but it's a very unique way of doing it, okay? So here are the values here, okay? So here is a sequence value. So the sequence table is fundamentally to go ahead and say that you're going on adding it by 1, okay? So that's what the sequence table is all about. Now you're taking the output value of the sequence number and inserting it to the invoices. Now this becomes one single DML operation. All DML operations can be rolled back. If it is rolled back, the values are rolled back, okay? That's one way of doing it. A similar way that a slightly same way, but this is like a correlated subquery, but it is not, and it's very interesting. You're doing a update statement in a correlated subquery. A lot of them have not tried this, but this is an interesting way of actually also writing. This is also like a composable DML that you go about making. But these are all different ways of writing it. So we can just go about creating this value. I got 5 minutes left, so I'll show you. Now, if I have to test it, let me quickly test it. So every time I call this stored procedure, passing it all the values. This is similar to all your insert stored procedure that you create, okay? It just goes about fi, it just goes about creating this, okay? So you will get a sequential this thing, and the rollback will also roll back the actual value. Now, there are these are some shortcuts to do it, okay? Obviously, product team is looking at it. A whole bunch of things have been told. I don't want to talk about these two, but this is an interesting one, okay? Let me talk about how many of you have used, you want to generate a row number, but you don't want to generate, you don't want to order it in specific order. You want to get it in some, whatever order you're spitting out, just give me a row number, okay? And at that point in time, a lot of them have gone ahead and said, okay, I just need the row number, let me try the row number, and then what happens is that you don't get any row number, which is interesting, and the best part is that you will get an error, which says that row number needs an order by. We say, okay, right, I want you to order by, but I don't want you to order by anything, okay? The interesting part was till CTP that we had of SQL Server 2008, this used to work, and in the final release, the engine team came and said that, okay, we don't allow this, because now the order by, you're not quantifying anything, so what do I do with it, right? So then the engine team was very kind enough in asking that, okay, what are the options with me? Engine team said, okay, you can send any scalar, okay, or you send me an expression, I'll evaluate the expression and I'll figure it out. I said, okay, right, fine, you've been kind enough in sending me that, so I'll say select null of it. All you need is an expression, I'm sending you an expression, evaluate it, it's nothing, it actually gets you the row number. Okay, so sometimes what happens is there are certain limitations, but you can get around the limitation knowing what are the other ways of actually using the same concept. Okay, null is not allowed, but at the same time expressions are allowed. Expression can return you a null object that's very much fair with the engine, and then it still gets you this this value. Okay, this is for just generating random. It does not have an order by, which means that you cannot 100% be confirmed that okay, you will get the same order every time. Okay, so please don't use this. I don't want. I mean, let me talk about. Okay, let me talk about the last thing, and then we'll conclude, which is around bushy plans. Okay, bushy plan is a lot of times we go ahead and this I have done at specific cases. How many of you understand that SQL Server is cost-based optimizer? All of you know it? Yes. Yeah. So being a cost-based optimizer, you go about saying that okay, right, I don't have this concept of applying a rule. I can't force SQL Server to run in a specific way, but there have been very remote places, like 0.01% of the places, where there has been requirements that I have to force my execution to happen in a specific way. Okay, so how do I force SQL Server to say that okay, I understand what your plans are, you're the best guy in the work, but I want you to run like this. So how do you go about doing it? Please do not use this, but this is just a concept. Okay, so the concept is more important. It's not to illustrate that, okay, you should be using like this. In a normal condition, I'm just joining 4 tables, okay, based on different values. The execution plan looks really great. It keeps on adding 2 tables at a time. It just takes 1 table, joins with the other table, takes the output, joins with the 3rd table, takes the output, joins with the 4th table. I might go ahead and say that, no, I don't want you to do it this way. I want you to join 1st and 2nd table. I want you to join 3rd and 4th table. And then both these output have to be joined. And I want you to force it. And how you can force it is in this way, is to force that order. Okay. Please don't try it in production environments. Okay, because what happens is, there are been cases where you need to do this. Especially, I've done this in batch operations. Okay. For certain financial verticals where there was a requirement that we have to be in certain way, just because of the data volumes that they handle. So that's the place where we go ahead and short circuit. Now understand the querying cost. Sometimes the optimizer does not take the best cost, because in the given limited amount of time, it has to select which is a good enough plan. How many of you heard about this concept? It can be a trivial plan, but it sometimes, if you see into the to this whole properties, sometimes it comes about saying that the optimization level is full here. In this particular case, I think so it will be full still. Let me just get into the execution plan. Sorry. And you see the optimization level here, and for some strange reason, right at the bottom, you can see that it's a good enough plan. It's a good enough plan. I figured out that, okay, I didn't go and over-engineer myself. I said, okay, I think so this should be good enough to run it. Just take it and run it. Okay. So sometimes optimizer does this, and because of which you might want to force it, and that's the reason why such options have been given. Maybe I have a couple of minutes, right? Okay, so want one more tip? 1 minute left. One more tip? Yes. Okay, so I can go up. Okay, so let me go down. Okay, so here's one other way in which you can go about dynamically recompiling it. Now understand that SQL Server 2008 allowed you to actually recompile at a statement level. Okay, even though we had an option that recompilations used to happen at the stored procedure level. Now even within a stored procedure, all of us have to be very clear that a statement within a stored procedure can also get recompiled, and it's very easy to find out. Okay, so if I just initiate a profiler, and let me just get it onto a radar here. I know they're going to kill me if I go overboard, but let me just try to finish it as early as possible. Here, and show all events, and go down. There you go. There's something called as an SP statement recompiled. Okay, that you're going to see, and even at this point in time, let me just run this. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is, whenever you set a recompile, in the earlier paradigm, what happened? The whole stored procedure used to recompile. Okay. In SQL Server 2008 onwards, and here's a classic example. So here's the classic example out here. Okay, so let me just create the object first. Okay, so there you go. I created the object, I created the index, and what I've done is I've said at a statement level, I said in the select statement option is recompile. I didn't say with recompile with the stored procedure. At a statement level, I said you recompile, because for different values I want you to recompile, because this comes to the same point. Remember earlier I told you I don't know which values are null. So when I send you different values, I don't want you to use an old execution plan and have a skew in the performance. So I'm telling that each time you do it, you recompile. So you can see that I'm sending different parameters over here. I'm sending different parameters each time. And just for illustration purposes, I'm just running 2 of the statements. Once I'm sending the order ID, second time I'm sending the order date. I run this. Let me go to profiler. So you will see here. Wait, what happened? Okay, so I don't have my trace clear yet. Let me just go ahead and add the statement level recompile. I didn't add the statement level recompile. SQL statement recompile. Run it. Here's the recompile that happened. Okay, so SQL now starts to do recompilation of just that single statement and not the, when I said SP, it meant the whole SP. SP never recompiled, but when I said SQL statement recompile, it started to show the recompile, and here it is. Okay, so that is what you had. We had enough of time, and then if time had permitted, I would have showed you a lot more things with it. So what all did I show you? I showed you a whole bunch of things. Actually, I showed you. We did a wake up time. I showed you some of these string manipulations, varchar, all that. I showed you on uniqueness with multiple nulls. I showed you on comma separation and dot separation IP addresses. How did we use hierarchy ID innovatively, and we used it. I showed you on date time, go to the baseline, come back, and all that. I showed you on custom sequences, what all can we do, how can you generate invoice numbers, all that I was talking about. And I talked about row numbering, about the select null, and I talked about the bushy join plans that we created, how to force SQL Server to execute in a particular way. Hopefully you enjoyed this session. These were some of my learnings from many customers that I could handle, and hopefully you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed delivering to you. I'm there for the Q&A offline. I think so I'm overboard on time, so catch me offline. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, folks.